Hey everyone, tax loss selling season is officially over, and now we could see a big rebound in the psychedelic industry. Why? Because Big Pharma is about to enter the space. And on top of that, we could see multiple Big Pharma companies partnering with multiple psychedelic companies early on in 2022. What does this mean for the industry? Find out now in our latest podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Trade to Black podcast, a division of the Dales Media Group. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Before we get into things, all views on the Trade to Black podcast and the guests on this podcast are purely opinion. You should not treat any opinions expressed by our guests as investment advice. The views on this podcast are solely intended to be informational and are not investment advice. Benjamin A. Smith, lead financial writer of the Dales Report, joins me. Happy holidays. How was Christmas?
Christmas was very good, Shad. Home with the fam, lots of gifts, lots of presents. Now I'm ready to gain in the mindset to get back into work full tilt in the new year. So hope you had a good Christmas as well.
Had some turkey, I assume, and ready to get the dopamines going again with the markets, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody's wondering what MSOs is going to do next year. You know, it's been a tough year and things like that, and we're going to get into it. But, a lot of exciting trading days ahead, I think.
Was there a lot of alcohol and cannabis consumption by you over the holidays looking at the prices of MSOS?
Not so much here because I was with my family, but, you managed to sneak in, a couple moments here and there. But for the most part, it's just, hanging out with the fam.
Well, let's begin with cannabis. Interesting piece that came up this week from CNBC involving key things to look for in 2022 in the industry, including an industry that they predict will generate $31 billion of the overall industry. Some of the key things, no surprise, was including safe banking. Other important things were THC beverages and the overall growth of the beverage industry related to cannabis this upcoming year. But let's begin, Ben. Bold statement I want to hear from you with regards to safe banking. Is 2022 the year that safe banking finally does pass?
That's a really tough call. I would more phrase it as I think 2022 is going to be the year where some federal regulatory change happens, whether that's in a safe banking format or something different. It's hard to say at this point. Obviously, Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats kiboshed, safe banking amendment early this month, and that would have moved the industry a lot forward. So I don't know if it's going to be in that specific form, but I think there's going to be a major push by Chuck Schumer. He's already out on Twitter yesterday pushing his CAOA Act draft legislation. So there's definitely going to be a push, I think, either late winter or spring to get this through.
We've heard a couple of rumors this week that Cory Booker could be presenting by mid-January an expungement bill. We don't know exact details of that bill, what it would be. In the event that were to happen, does that help the overall industry as far as like a market perspective? Or is safe banking basically the catalyst that's going to be required to obviously get this to rebound?
Yeah, that's a really good question because obviously expungements don't have a direct effect on the capital market side in terms of cost of capital, in terms of getting these companies uplisted to other exchanges. But I do think it'll have some knockoff effects just because if federal regulation of any sort gets passed, it will increase confidence that there will be more ahead, right? That maybe a safe banking type amendment will be included and it will be more encompassing in the future, right? So I think getting the first federal regulatory initiative under the belt is going to be a net positive for the market, even if it doesn't directly affect these companies, top lines.
So you get into the industry or do you continue to wait on the sidelines going into 2022?
That's a really tough call. There's obviously some headwinds right now with cannabis pricing decreasing and producer price index at all-time highs. So that, there's some margin compression there. Q4 reports, financial reports that are going to be released mostly in March, probably won't be as strong as some has hoped. But then again, a lot of the stuff is already probably priced in. And as you mentioned, Cory Booker, if he introduces some sort of expungement bill, even if it doesn't have that direct effect, it's going to move the ball forward and increase confidence that more could be coming down the pike. So the way I kind of look at things is, MSOs has a great future. The individual components that comprise MSOs have a great future. It's just really about timing and about whether, we could go a little bit lower, or, if you have more of a long-term view, it's probably at pretty good price points right here.
Yeah. Early this week, you posted a story in the Dales Report outlining the top 4 cannabis picks for 2022. They include MSOS, Air Wellness, TrueLeaf, and CureLeaf. So let's begin with MSOS. Do we see a rebound in early January, or how do we see this performing in the first month?
Yeah, when I comprised the list, I tried to look at things that and individual components and derivative and securities like MSOS that would have sort of an outsized performance. Obviously, if the sector goes up completely, most companies will benefit. But the thing I liked about MSOS is that it doesn't have some of the risks associated with a downgrade by analysts, for example, or an earnings miss or a revenue guidance downgrade, things like that would affect individual companies. So while I wouldn't anticipate if the market turns around that MSOS would necessarily be among the top performers, I think it's one of the safest performers in that it's not subject to individual equity risk like some of its components. That was the thinking beside MSOS.
Do you not see the first 2 to 3 weeks of the calendar year very important for this industry? And what I mean by that is that if there isn't movement in prices, let's say by mid-January, I'm hearing that you could have an influx of money with the overall industry leaving for the short term. And actually, like you said, when they come back later on this year, I don't know in the exact time, but how important is that? Are you seeing the same trends in the first couple of weeks heading into the calendar year? And if so, again, what are you thinking as to how this market will perform based on, like you said, a stock like MSOS?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think it's actually quite important, right? Because obviously tax law selling was probably a big component to the decline in Q4. Right, especially since it was pretty obvious early, and then post the Safe Banking Amendment when that was kiboshed by Senate Democrats, there was probably more tax law selling on top of what already transpired before that, right? So if we don't get that big push early in January, where new money is coming in, tax loss is over, people are staking positions to take advantage of what could be a regulatory regime change in 2022, I think that would be sort of a not a great sign that that Q1 performance could be pretty good, because you would expect more people to take their tax losses and re-enter the market, right? So I think you hit the nail on the head. The first couple of weeks are going to be important to see if we can get some traction in MSOS, get some upward momentum, and then hopefully it feeds on itself.
What do you think happens?
Again, it's a tough call. It's a tough call because you have like competing headwinds and competing tailwinds. In one respect, MSOs is acting a lot better recently. It seemed to have temporarily found a bottom. Sellers have dissipated a little bit. Buyers are sort of taking control, and it's setting up for perhaps a higher low, which is what you want to see technically. But on the same front, if you look at the weekly chart, things are still below 7 EMAs. It's not really shaping up, technically speaking, right now. And of course, you got the headwinds, as CNBC mentioned recently, declining cannabis prices about 15% year to date, and then a high producer costs, which are really not going down. Inflation is still sort of running rampant, right? So you have competing headwinds, some tailwinds, and the sector has been, a lot of the stuff is already priced in. So, I think it's going to be a tougher environment. I wouldn't be surprised to see a bounce very early on, and then we'll kind of see where it goes from there.
Because I know, like, when you guys had discussed in the past with you and Anthony, if this flirts with all-time lows, can you imagine the entry points for people to get into this industry? Like, this is crazy when you think about, again, the revenue that's being generated, the overall health of the industry, but what a lucrative time it is for somebody that's just like getting involved in this industry for the first time to walk in. It's truly I think, a huge opportunity to say the least. But I boldly think that safe banking is definitely going to pass at some point this year. When, I don't know, but this is a political thing. And I do think that we'll start to see some movement in the industry if this expungement bill is brought to fruition as early as next month.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, right? And that's what makes investing very tough, right?
There's a lot of pressure that's going on right now. Like, a lot of people are like, what the fuck is going on? Like, big advocates for this bill, and nothing's come to fruition in the first 365 days. But I think there's a lot of pressure that's going on, especially when you look at the overall revenue that's being generated.
Yeah. Again, that's what makes investing tough, because, you know, fundamentally these stocks are way undervalued compared to like just the regular S&P retail sector, right?
Yeah.
And they're growing at much faster clips. Obviously, we all know where this is going long term.
Yeah.
But the thing with fundamentals is they could, you know, be depressed for very, very long periods of time, and that's what you're seeing right now. So really, I view this whole trade as an investment sequence early on as like is a timing thing, right? If you're long-term oriented, if you're like 3 to 5 years out, then today's prices are sort of like a no-brainer. Right now, if you're more of a swing trader, if you're more looking what could happen in 2022 in the first half, then you have to be a little bit more picky on your price points. So we'll see how it goes. But you know, the fact that Chuck is already tweeting out about his CAOA Act is a good sign that they want to move the ball forward. I think, you know, early in 2022 as opposed to later.
Hallelujah. Heard that before.
Yeah, no kidding.
Let's focus on the psychedelic industry. Tax law selling season is over. A new year is ahead of us. Thank God for this industry. We're starting to see some movement from specific companies in this space. Do you think the days of the industry moving as a unison, meaning like if one company's up, the whole industry's up, and vice versa, if it's down, the whole industry is down? We're hearing more and more that you're going to start to see specific companies start to break away from that regimen. Do you believe that, Ben?
Yeah, I do. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be some correlation to what the overall sector is doing and weighing on individual stocks or help provide a little bit of a tailwind if the sector itself is going up. No different than, like, say, IBB or, you know, biotech stocks trending up, sort of, you know, lifting all boats, and, you know, or lowering all boats when the tide goes out, right? So you're always going to have some of that component. But I would agree also that psychedelic companies are going to be more siloed, and it won't be like cannabis or some other sectors where there's a very tight correlation. When the sector moves, they all kind of move. I think you're going to see less of that in the psychedelic market, just because some of these companies are not capitalized, for example, or the prospects might not be as good as some of the top tier names like Compass or Atai, Cybin, etc. Right? So you're going to see more individuality, and it's definitely more than most sectors going to be a stock picker's market. So you really got to do your due diligence on this one.
How much interest do you think institutions will generate towards the industry when we start to see big pharma partnerships? That's coming. We don't know how fast it'll happen in 2022, but in the event that we were to get a big pharma partnership announced in the month of January, translate what that'll do for the industry from an investment standpoint, because I know you and I have talked before, what's it going to take to get this industry out of the slumber? Something like that obviously would do it. But do you not think we will see a lot of institutional buying start to gravitate towards this industry in the event that does happen?
Yeah, I do. I do think so, because I think a lot of the times it's sort of a follow the leader situation with big pharma getting into the space. We saw it in the cannabis industry as well, right? When Constellation made their first investment with Canopy Growth, right? That really lit the fire in the conversation, the narrative with investors, but also the industry about other big alcohol conglomerates purchasing LPs to get in, right? It really took off after that first, surprise Constellation investment. So I think you're going to see the same thing happen here in this industry, where if you see like, maybe a mid-level player or even a big player like Johnson & Johnson sort of, take a stake in one of these promising companies, others are going to be more amenable to that. And it would also show the promise of the industry, and it would be a validator of the promise, even though things are still, a few years away from actually bringing a drug to market. It's really going to validate sort of the promise of what, big pharma executives think of the industry. So it's definitely going to be a net positive.
Well, one company that we've been watching closely over the past 10 days is Mindset Pharma. They're up over 45%, even though the industry's been relatively flat. As we talk about this industry not moving as unison, it's a prime example. And we want to learn, obviously, more, too. If that big pharma does come in, does this open up the opportunity for more partnership announcements as the year progresses with more companies and more big pharma companies? And to learn more, we brought in our guest of the week, CEO of Mindset Pharma, James Lanthier, and here's what he had to say. All right, it's time for our guest of the week of the Trade to Black podcast, and we are happy to be joined with the CEO of Mindset Pharma, James Lanthier. James, how are you, sir?
Dad, I am great. Thanks for having me on.
How's the holiday season?
So far, so good.
So far, so good?
Yeah.
I would think so. Like, I'm looking at your stock performance over the past 10 days, up over 45%. So obviously a good, happy holiday season for you, a lot of the shareholders of Mindset Pharma. But we wanted to have you on. Ben and I have been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. Let's face it, this industry has hit some hard times this past year. We got off to a quick start. The last 2 months, as we know, has been struggling. But we've talked about how this industry could rebound real fast coming into January. So my question to you, what are you hearing, and what do you anticipate, I guess, that you could share with investors in this industry as to what we can anticipate going into the new year as soon as January comes around?
Yeah, look, I think 100% this industry is going to rebound.
You do? Okay.
The capital market side of it will rebound. I mean, I think it's important for everyone to understand that in a lot of ways, the industry, it never lost momentum. Like, right. It's all the scientific work that underpins it has continued and advanced, and there's more data to show at a high level that these drugs do a great job of treating, these hard to treat mental health indications. But even on the capital market side as well, stock prices go up and down, and there's a lot of small companies, and retail investor interest can have a lot of impact on kind of short-term valuations. But really what we see on kind of almost a daily basis is more and more and more institutional capital that is really interested in the space and watching it really, really closely. And from a biotech standpoint, because that's really at the end of the day what we think this sector is, it's still relatively young, but that's changing. And what I foresee in 2022 and beyond is I just think there's going to be a tremendous amount of institutional capital that is really going to flow into the space that's really going to exceed by a large margin what's come in so far, and I think that will have a profound impact on the sector. I also think that just based on what we see, I do think there'll be some nearer term catalysts that are going to draw more interest. I think there's
those are.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see probably in not too long is real pharmaceutical interest in the space. To date, pharma has been kind of on the sidelines doing diligence, and it's been these kind of psychedelic pure plays that have been the ones advancing the work. But there is no question that they're watching. They've seen the data. And I think you're going to see a couple of them start to make, serious moves into the space, which I think will be, a great validation for all the work that everyone's doing.
Yeah, what's that do for the
space?
What's that do for the industry, you think? It sounds great on paper, but what do you think this does, obviously, for the industry if and when that does happen?
Yeah, I think that attracts more capital, and that attracts more investor interest, and to some degree, pharmaceutical companies, like a lot of industries, when one big player does something, a lot of the other players will follow. So I think once you see the first deal happen, then I think you'll see, a bunch of others in relatively quick succession. Yeah. It's also important to understand that there's a lot of institutional investors who really just kind of track what pharma does. And so I think that, pharma deals will have the effect of drawing in, even more investors who, until now may have been kind of watching the space, but haven't taken a position yet. So I think that'll be a big impact.
That's interesting, because it's something do you think we could see, well, I guess we don't know, but at the end of the day, it's like if we see an announcement in early Q1, and you're saying once one partnership is announced, we'll see probably a lot to follow suit. That would bode well, obviously, for a big growth year for the industry, would it not?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the industry, as far as the new drugs go, a lot of them are still at a preclinical stage, but if you kind of look across biotech, these kinds of partnerships are getting done really earlier and earlier. So I do think the timing is the timing is right, and I think that could have a hugely positive impact on the sector, because until now, really, you've had from kind of a tie and compass on down, you've had a lot of these new, effectively kind of startups that have been talking about how how transformative the drugs are, talking about kind of the market potential of the space. But it's a whole other thing to have, a strategic groups that have that expertise in bringing drugs to market, taking them through the regulatory process. That's a completely different type of endorsement than kind of a new, startup sector. So 100%. I think it'll have a huge impact.
Ben, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I guess my first question, to the point that you were just talking about, would be to ask whether you think that this is, if such moves are going to happen in next year, is that a way for some of these junior biotech psychedelic companies to gain capital for their research, as opposed to raising on the public markets when their equity prices are down? Do you foresee sort of like an economic interest sort of tying into this, where it's sort of beneficial for both sides?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a great thing. If you look at kind of where the funding came from for a lot of those sort of junior psychedelic companies, you're talking about kind of a handful of really important sort of VC funds, and then then a lot of retail interest and kind of family office interest. Not a whole ton so far of the sort of next level, biotech, big institutional biotech funds. I do think that, some pharma deals, though, that are, on attractive terms, that'll really buoy the interest in the space. And I think it will also, like I said, have the effect of drawing in the bio funds that really kind of follow what pharma is doing, and for whom up until now psychedelics were just a little too kind of early, but it'll be the validation that they're looking for, that they need in order to start getting involved.
James, do you think that—
Now, I also wanted to ask you about your recent performance as well, that Chad pointed out a couple minutes ago, that Mindset Pharma is up about 47% since December 17th, and this is in stark contrast to the sector, which is the Psych ETF is making new lows. We actually wrote about it yesterday on the TDR site. Now, is there obviously it's a stock picker's market at this point, and you go into 2022 with a lot of momentum on the price action side on the exchanges. Is there a reason for that, or I know obviously you can't comment on anything, but you think it's just more awareness with Mindset in general, or it must be really nice to have this price momentum at least going into next year, I would think.
Oh, sure. Obviously, it's great, and that that's what we're trying. We're at a 80,000 foot level, like any public company. You're trying to get investors to appreciate the value in what you're doing, and so it's a really nice testament to that. I think there's no real secret sauce to it other than the fact that Mindset, in terms of its, share capital, we're pretty tightly held by, by insiders and a lot of, friends of insiders who are really real believers in what we're doing. And I think in the last, few months, we've really managed to separate ourselves from the pack in a lot of ways with just the sheer amount of data that we've been able to share that really differentiates, our new drugs compared to, to the first generation drugs. And I think if you kind of look around, the space, you'd be hard pressed to find another group that has, as much data demonstrating that that our portfolio, is improved in some ways compared to the first generation drug. So it's really the combination of the fact that we've been able to really, do what we said we were going to do and show that to the market. And certainly we spend a lot of time meeting with, a whole range of different folks, getting the story out there. So I think that it's kind of all those things coming together at the same time, but it is very nice for sure.
James, I believe that the industry moving as a unison, whether up or down, I think those days are over. As we head into this new year, you keep talking about data. Obviously, data is an important thing, and having a pathway to get there is another thing. You're one of the few companies, if not the only company in the space, that's currently focusing on second and third generation psychedelic compounds. One thing I've noticed too is that you've actually registered patents going back as far as 2 years ago, which was actually well before this industry garnered any attention. So when you factor in those two key components, and when you talk about pure science and data that you're performing each and every month right now over the past year or so, why is that? Drum that all up as to why it's important for your company, but also important trends that investors should look for as they move into 2022 and you start to see the maturity of the overall industry.
Yeah, so we were of the view from the very beginning, when Mindset was founded. The founding team was of the view that the big opportunity in the medical psychedelic space would ultimately be in what we call next generation psychedelic drugs, and for really two simple reasons. One is that there's an opportunity to improve on the old drugs through drug design, through making small, careful changes to the chemical structures of the old drugs and then testing them to figure out what the winners are. And number two, because first generation drugs are all in the public domain. So you can't get a patent on psilocybin, DMT, MDMA. The best you can do is really patent, a formulation of one of those drugs, but it offers you, very little in the way of competitive, barriers or differentiation. And we thought that this would be the area where all the kind of value would a lot of the value would go to, because for those, two simple reasons, we figured that institutional investors, Big Pharma, would only be interested in next generation drugs. Okay. I would say that was a bit of a lonely story to be telling at first. A lot of groups who were entering the space in kind of the early 2020 were picking pathways that were a little bit easier, a little bit easier to understand and articulate to investors. But I think in hindsight, it was great that the wider psychedelic world didn't quite see things the same way as we did, because it gave us an opportunity to get our patents in and file them early, which makes a huge difference. You don't have to be an IP law expert to understand that whoever files their patent first on any invention is the group that gets the priority. And is the group that ultimately owns that invention. So that was kind of part number one, was getting the patents filed, and then part number two was starting to actually test these compounds in in a lab environment. And we were kind of a little bit quieter, a little bit slower than some other groups, or seemed slower, because we didn't want to rush out and pick a compound as a lead really quickly for the sake of announcing a lead. We really wanted to really kind of carefully go through this screening process, which we've done. And what all of that has led us to now is I think a portfolio that is exactly where we were hoping we would be. We have priority on our inventions and what we're working on. We know that we filed our patents, or we believe that we filed our patents before anyone else filed similar patents. And now we've got data because of the screening program to really show that what we've invented actually has, real value and isn't just patentable for the sake of patentable, which was never going to be enough because, these drugs the first generation drugs are really good. You have to create something better. So really what you're seeing is kind of the fruits of our early efforts. Coming together.
When you touch on all this, and we'll wrap things up here. So you believe, based on a lot of the stuff that you're doing amongst other companies in this space, we will see Big Pharma enter in real fast in 2022, and we will see, you think, a number of Big Pharma partnerships announced in this year. Do you think?
Yes. Yeah, I do believe that. I think you'll start to see. I think there's enough evidence behind these drugs. There's enough, attractive portfolios out there that I think you'll see it. You'll see it coming in and relatively early in 2022, and I think you'll see more than one.
Bodes well for the industry. That's good, is it not?
Oh, it's great.
Exactly.
It's great.
Exactly. Listen, happy holidays to you and the fam. Enjoy, obviously, New Year's Eve, and we will see you in the new year. And appreciate you joining us here in the podcast this week.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much. Happy 2022.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James.